Welcome back to another episode of Taking Inventory, another Snap Mafia edition. Today we've got David Shim on the podcast, who is the co-founder and CEO of Read AI. He was formerly the founder and CEO of Placed, which was acquired by Snap. Spent a number of years there. Was the president and CEO of Foursquare, and now doing Read AI. So really excited to have David on the podcast. Thank you for being here.
No, I'm excited to be here. This is fun to get the group back together again.
Obviously, we've known each other for a number of years from our time at Snap, but for listeners out there, let's start with just your journey, how you even got to a place where you started Placed and everything that's transpired since then.
Yeah, absolutely. So early days, I moved down to the Valley, worked at a startup called Quantcast. And what they did was analytics on what websites you visit. And the way that they would do it is, and this is really pixel-based, taking inventory, they would put a pixel on different websites and they would create this report called similar audiences. So it would go in and say, of the people that went to this website, what other websites do they go to? And people thought this was incredible, especially people that couldn't afford Comscore, Nielsen, et cetera, as this free service. And so they had these pixels where we were, at the time, the number 2 or number 3 cookie dropper on the internet. And so we had everyone adding pixels to their website, getting this analytics. Then we started to do things like infer demographics, age, ethnicity, income. Because based on the websites that you go to, it actually really highlights. If you go to 3 or 4 websites, I can define your gender pretty closely. I can define your income. I can define your ethnicity in a lot of cases because there are these tentpole websites that kind of create a lot of metadata. So I worked there. And then around, 2010, 11, iPhone came out, version 1 or iPhone 1. And we had this conversation internally about, hey, what are we going to do about the iPhone? And there was a bet on, is it going to be mobile web or is it going to be in-app? And our bet, because we were a web company, was really on mobile web winning. And this was in the early days where people thought one or the other was going to win. And apps were actually a little bit behind the times to start with because not everybody knew how to build an app. Not everyone had an app. And so from there, I started to dive into this app ecosystem. And I was like, okay, this is kind of interesting. You can actually get more data from an app than you can from a mobile website. What's the data that you can get? And one of those things was location data. And so I dove into that a little bit more. Didn't do anything with that right off the bat, but I had a friend of mine start to go to these conferences for Android because Android hadn't come out yet, but they're starting to do these conferences. I was like, okay, here's my thesis. I need to be able to run an app in background that gets location data with user permission. And he went to one conference, like, not possible. Went to a conference 3 months later, and he's like, oh, they actually rolled out an SDK that lets you do that. I was like, okay, this is really interesting. And then I had to make a decision, like, what was I going to do? Was I going to make the jump or not to get into location analytics? And this was before location analytics existed. And I decided to make a jump there. And so from there, started a company called Placed. And what we did was we actually paid people for their location data. So think of it like Nielsen or Comscore, but instead of going in and saying, we're just running in background, getting your data, we're cutting you a check every single month. And what we were able to do with that was actually get people to opt in to share more data because we were being more transparent with them. They were actually checking into places to validate our models. So imagine training data. They would actually go to a location. We would ask them a survey. Here's 5 businesses. 3 were our best guesses. 2 were random places that weren't anywhere nearby. And based on the responses that they would give us, that actually trained our model to say, let's look at accelerometer, gyroscope, compass when they go inside of a store, because when you're inside of a store, the GPS goes off the rails and it looks like you're 3 blocks away. Hey, let's start to look at Wi-Fi signal. What's stronger? What are they actually connected to? So we wouldn't have been able to do that had people not confirmed the places where they were at. So we started that, and I really built a model around analytics and really Comscore to say, here are the most popular businesses. Here's where females go versus males. Here's where Democrats versus Republicans go. And we got a lot of press around that. The problem with that was people were like, this is really interesting data, but what do I do with it? There was no actionability. And probably like early days of Snap, it's like, hey, how are you going to put ads here? How is this going to actually resonate with different folks? Like, hey, you're building this free product. Can you really actually monetize it? People talk about it, but what are you doing? And for us, I was wrong on the analytics piece. Like the analytics piece was key, but on the back end, what we ran into was an issue of how do you actually activate against it? And so the activation ultimately came from the mobile ad networks. They came to us and said, hey, we've got a bunch of ad inventory. We only measure click-through rates, and click-through rates are really poor in mobile ads. So we don't have a thing to say, this is the value of the $100,000 that you spent. And they said, can you actually connect the dots from ad exposure to store visit? And that actually built our core product called Placed Attribution.
Oh yeah, and then for you, I mean, like, how big did Place get, and then how did the deal kind of with Snap come to, and what was that whole process like for any other kind of founders out there?
Yeah, so we were growing pretty quickly. We were pretty efficient. So this was back in 2011 that we started. So our seed round was $300,000. So that'll give your audience a little bit of context. And that was a seed round that I actually got like 5 or 6 employees on board with. So that was really kind of frugal, really early stage startup. We raised a $3 million round from Madrona Venture Group. They had previously funded a company I worked at called Faircast. And then in 2000, I was at like 15, Two Sigma Ventures put in some money. So during that time, we'd raised about $13 million. We had grown the business when we started that attribution piece from like 1 million to 3 million to 7 million to 15 million. And at the time of acquisition from Snapchat, it was, I want to say it was around 20-ish million dollars in revenue that was coming through. And with that revenue, we were profitable for the last 4 years. So it was actually, we weren't burning the cash that we had raised in the Series B. We were actually adding to the cash balance. And so that was a big win. And the way that we got started with Snap was I actually was calling a lot of folks at Snap on a regular basis to say, can I measure inventory to store visit? Can I measure your store inventory? Like, no one's asking for you. Why would we integrate you? Go somewhere else. And we kept doing that. And then finally, we had a couple of big clients come on board and say, like, hey, we're not going to buy on Snap unless you turn on Read. And they're like, hey, what's going on, guys? Come on over. Let's have a conversation. And I think it was the right thing to do, honestly, if I was on the other side, to go in and say, you can't integrate everything. You have to pick the ones that have the most customer demand. But once you get those right customers, they will move the needle so quickly. And so we had that discussion. We got integrated. We started getting integrated. And it was really interesting. Imran, was it Steve Wong reached out and he said, like, hey, can we meet up? Met up, told them stories. Like, and I thought this was purely a BD deal. So I was like, hey, I'm going to get into Snapchat. We're going to crush it. Like, that was the last big partner. We were integrated into Facebook, YouTube, all this inventory that was like hard to get to, we were measuring, and Snap was the last holdout. And so then we got to that point where we're like, okay, hey, Imran, so I met with Steve. He said, this is really interesting. Hey, can you fly out and meet with Imran? And I was like, why did the CSO want to meet me? But like, okay, sure, I'll meet with them. So really, he gave me about 48 hours notice, got on a flight, got there, walked into the room. I was in just kind of jeans and a t-shirt. And I was like, hey, what's going on? What do you want? Kind of like in a good way. Like, how can I help you? I want to sell this in. It's like, tell me about your business. It's like, why are you asking me about my revenue? Why are you asking me about the team size? Like, it's very kind of like corp dev questions that I was not prepared for. And then near the end of the meeting, everyone's like, hey, if you could do anything with Snapchat, what would you do? I was like, yeah, I would measure inventory to store visit. It's like, no, if you could do anything with Snapchat, what would you? I was like, do more of your inventory. I actually did. This is where I was a rookie founder. I didn't have any context. I left the meeting and I was like, I told my team, I was like, man, he asked me this weird question and I did not answer correctly because he just made a face. But fast forward, like, he liked the business, he liked the team, he liked the folks that he said, hey, we want to build out DoubleClick with a privacy centric mindset. And Read would be one of those Place would be one of those key pieces. And so that's what really got us interested, because if you look at Google and that DoubleClick acquisition, it was a seminal moment for them. And I think I was excited about that. But what was really interesting was when Imran, we were just talking, I still didn't have much context. And then it's been a long enough time that I can say this, like Snapchat was going to invest in our next round. We were going to go raise a Series C. That Series C was going to be about a $30 million plus round. And we were about to get a term sheet on Monday. On Saturday, I gave the Snapchat team a heads up, like, hey, get your check ready. We're about to close here. The term sheet, they're going to move pretty quickly. And then Imran calls me. I was like, hey, what if we just bought you guys? And I knew that was going to happen. All right, I didn't know, but I had a feeling something like that might happen. And so that just fast forwarded that conversation. So great decision. I think where we really we had one of the only exits in the location space. We were growing very quickly. Snap helped us grow even faster. I think there was a refocus when we spun out in 2019 around the core business. Like, I think there's a refocus on the ad business and the core platform, where there's an opportunity for Snap to go in and say, hey, Read is growing. It's continuing to be profitable. Do we go in and give them the opportunity to spin it out? And I'll say to Imran and the rest of the executive team, they were actually great and co-founder or founder friendly, where they said, like, hey, we have a number of companies that want to spin you out of Snapchat. Do you want to get spun out? And they just asked me that question. And I was like, Yeah, or actually, at first I was like, I'm not sure. Like, we're doing a lot of cool things, and we had a lot of stuff that we were working on together that we were going to become more integrated. But it was also the focus was a little bit different at that point because Imran had left and the team had kind of shifted a little bit, and so the opportunity was really to go to Foursquare or there's another player, and with Foursquare, it was really building the de facto leader in location, and that really ultimately was the decision that we went with, and couldn't have been happier with that decision.
It's awesome, man. And was the Foursquare experience, like when you got there, like that panel data plus what you were doing, is it like, do people still not quite get how like valuable and how big the footprint is of that company?
Yeah, I think people still think about it's a check-in app. Hey, I use Yelp instead now, or hey, I use Google reviews, and that's still a core consumer business. It's growing. There's a lot of people that use it still. They check into different places. It's funny, internationally, they're actually one of the biggest review sites in certain markets, and people just don't realize that. But the enterprise business has really grown. And publicly, I'm not as actively involved, but publicly, that business is over $100 million. It's been running profitably. The team continues to grow. Like there's a lot of kind of opportunity there to grow the business because what's happening is the platforms themselves, like Android, Apple, they're going in and actually making it harder to get access to that location data, and they're limiting the players who can access it. And it's the players that actually measure that data in the right way that continue to have access to it. So what's happening is the data is becoming more valuable, but it's also getting harder to get that data. And I think when you combine those two things together, there's a big opportunity out of Foursquare.
And so when you were at Foursquare, first as president, then as CEO, I mean, you spent a number of years kind of leading that organization. And then at what point did you realize that, this, maybe you had kind of completed your tenure there and it was on to the next journey and maybe pass on the reins? And what was that process like for you?
Yeah, it was an interesting scenario. So 3 months into the acquisition, the board came to me and said, "Hey, we'd like you to be CEO." And I was like, "We didn't talk about this." And I was president at the time. They're like, "We'd like you to be CEO," and I was like, "Okay." I told you all like I wanted to stick around for about a year and then see if I wanted to stay or not because I had sold Reed at that, or sorry, placed at that point like three variations of that. So like from funding to Snapchat to Foursquare, I was like, this was my company in spirit, but in terms of like, was I a founder of Foursquare? No, Dennis Crawley was the founder of Foursquare. It wasn't me. Naveen as well was the founder of Foursquare. So for me, it was kind of like I was running the ship, but I wasn't necessarily the founder. So I was like, but it is a really interesting opportunity, a global brand, incredibly powerful first party data, really the right way to do location. And so I said, this is an interesting opportunity. This is something that I probably wouldn't have an opportunity in the next year or two to do. I was like, all right, let's do this. And I still wanted it to be incredibly successful. And so from there, took over as CEO, had to make a bunch of hard decisions. So we had to make hard decisions and two reasons why, where one was COVID. So when you're Foursquare, you're a location company, people weren't going out for about 2 years. So that was a little bit problematic. We had to figure out how to handle that. And we had to make some tough decisions. Number two is we consolidated the industry. So we actually merged with a company called Factual. And Foursquare was actually a competitor of Factual. Factual rolled up. So then it became Placed, Foursquare, Factual. And the funny thing was Snapchat used all three of those services for different purposes. Factual was targeting, Foursquare was places, Placed was attribution. So we really kind of brought all those three things together. And that business ultimately, like I said, got to 100 million plus in revenue, profitable. And we were the industry leader because I think people don't want 15 different choices when it comes to location. It really is like you want one choice that you can trust, and then you want to move on to bigger things because location's a big market, but Snapchat is bigger, Facebook is bigger, Google is bigger. And so you want to pick what is your preferred attribution solution and then run with that across the inventory.
So after that tenure, then, so you got the business to over $100 million,
Oh yeah.
and then you took a break. You decided, okay, I imagine you've gotten this company to a certain place. You've had this journey with Placed across three different companies now, or three different milestones. You need a break. It's COVID. You probably need some time to refresh, and then coming out of that, you decide, this wasn't enough. I'm going to start another company in an entirely new space. So what, like, talk to us a little bit about the lead up to Reed and where you guys are now today.
Yeah. So the lead up was I had to make a decision as the company was in a good spot. We did the factual acquisition. We got to profitability. Revenue was there. I was like, am I going to stick around to push this to an IPO or an even bigger exit? And for me, uh, I'd been in location for a decade, and it was kind of like I had already made the decision a year or two before that, hey, I want to see where things are at. But this got accelerated a little, or this got more responsibility got pushed to me, so it got pushed back a little bit. So what I did was I gave the board the heads up, like, hey, almost a year before I was ready to kind of step down, this is what I'm thinking. I just want to make sure that you're all aware, and let's plan a kind of proper transition, a healthy transition. So that worked out well. And then when I got to that point, I was like, okay, I'm going to take as much time off as possible. But I think if you look at anyone who's left Snapchat, like their breaks are like a lot shorter than you would expect based on the success that everyone's had. And I think it's just kind of that entrepreneurial nature. It's like you want to build cool shit, like at the end of the day. And if you see an opportunity to build really cool shit, you're going to go in and say, am I going to wait a year and assume this is still going to be there, or do I want to take this thing down? And for me, it was I was in Mexico because that was the only place that was open during COVID for the U.S. I went to like pretty much anywhere that was open for about 6 months. And at a certain point, like I got bored. I was on a beach. I was walking around. I was like, I've seen this beach. It's a beautiful sunset, but I was just kind of bored. During that time, I was doing a lot of calls because the market was getting a little bit hotter. People were like, can I get advice? Can you think about investing in this company? And what I found was I was on a call and someone wasn't like, it was like maybe 20 people on the call. And I wasn't paying attention because everyone knows within about 5 minutes, like, is this relevant to me or not? Is this a good call or not? They invited too many people. This is not good. But then I started to see someone's reflection. So, like on James's glasses, let's say I see a reflection and it's red colored and there's a little bit of black and it looks like a basketball game going on or something. And I saw that. I was like, that looks very familiar. And this wasn't James, by the way, but somebody else. And I looked at it. I was like, oh, this is ESPN.com. We're both on ESPN.com during this call right now as the main screen. And I was like, okay, there's got to be a better way to do this. There's so much inefficiency when it comes to meetings. And I just started to, more and more calls I had, this person's disengaged. I use a lot of Snapchat terminology, like this person's in ghost mode where they hide, where it's like they don't have their camera on, they're on mute, they don't say anything. And I started to like look at the numbers. I'm like, this is a really inefficient process of really communicating information. And if you think about it from an ad inventory perspective, it's like bunch of banner ads that have never been optimized, and your goal is right now spray and pray. And especially during COVID, it was about let me invite everybody to the meeting so everyone is aware of what's going on, rather than going in and saying who are the right people to bring to the meeting. Because if I bring someone in for an hour, it's a waste of time, especially if they're a software engineer, a VP, etc. And so that really got me down the loop of like what is possible to do when it comes to video conferencing and measurement. And so I went in a little bit deeper and I said, hey, are there any models out there to measure sentiment and engagement in real time? And this wasn't just based on the words, because I've been on calls where it's like, hey, this is the next big thing. We're going to do all these cool things. This is what's going to happen. And you're like, this is never going to happen. This is not realistic. This person's full of it. And when those things happen, if you just use the words, it's going to give you wrong context. It's going to say, this is a fantastic call. We should absolutely drop everything and work on this because this person talked about it in a certain way where immediate ROI. But in reality, this technology is not ready for prime time. They don't have a big enough team. It's not going to roll out for at least another year. And when you have those things, you're not going to tell the person like, this is a shitty idea. We're not going to do it. It's like, yeah, that's good. Cool. Good. Yeah, that's awesome. All right. That's great. And then you say these things. And at the end of the conversation, you want to look at how people reacted. And so we call that the reaction layer. So we started to build models to say, are you nodding your head in agreement when someone says something? Are you stopping early on in a conversation, the first 5 minutes, you'll interrupt each other because someone might have slow internet, a computer that's slow, someone might have a delay in their microphone. And so you'll pick that up and within 5 minutes, just naturally the way your brain processes. But if you actually wait a little bit and it's 15 or 20 minutes in the call and you're still interrupting each other, you're not in sync. So we have this concept called synchrony that we built a model against. We have a thing called prosody. It's the tone of your voice as it goes up or down. The pace of your voice where it goes, my average is about 200 words per minute. So I talk pretty fast. But if it goes to 250 or 3, it's saying, okay, David's either really excited or really nervous. Or if I start talking really slow, it goes and it says, oh, maybe he's not paying attention. So it's like, hey, can you repeat that? What was that again? And so all of those things, large language models don't pick up. So we built these models around that reaction layer. And fast forward when it was all ready to go, we published an app, and that app was in Zoom App Store. It was on a number of different platforms. And what we realized, the retention wasn't high enough, because the retention was after 30 days, about 5% of people were still using it. The 5% were like hardcore enthusiasts. We love it. This is incredible. I can do sales pitches. I can understand, like, when I only have my PowerPoint presentation up, I look at the read number and I know when to stop talking about something because someone at the engagement has started to go down. Hey, I'm a teacher and I've got a class of 40 people. I can't actually read the room like I used to in a virtual environment. This has made me a better speaker. So all those things have been great. But we were like, it's got to be better retention. What are we going to do to make that better? And that goes to really the ad tech, the analytics, the measurement experience, where it's like, okay, you can't just go in and say, this is going to work, this is a great idea, but like, what's the actual application? What's the outcome that you're trying to drive?
And what was like, what has been kind of the like main insight of like how to get that retention higher?
Yeah. So we did the real-time stuff, strong, loyal base. Retention wasn't as strong as we wanted it to be. We actually didn't even do transcription when we first started, because we said there's a bunch of companies that already do transcription for a decade. It's kind of a commodity at the end of the day. So why would we come out with another transcription service? But we knew we had to figure out what's the actual outcome that we can generate. What's the thing that we're solving for beyond the numbers? And so what we did was we said, hey, what if we took every sentence that was said and then we applied the scores against that for the people that heard that sentence? And so think of it like, I said this, but James and Daniel reacted this way. So imagine a large language model that can do that. So right now, all the large language models are just quotes. So if you just take all the quotes in a book, that's what we have today when it comes to the large language models. What we have introduced is that narration layer that we can go and say, David said this. This is how people reacted. James nodded in agreement while Daniel disagreed violently, and he shook his head really hard. Like, or hey, everyone laughed. David laughed and said a joke, but nobody laughed. Like, those are things that the large language models wouldn't pick up. We're bringing that data into the system. And so then we started to create these meeting summaries. And what we found was, like, some of it was really basic. Small talk disappeared, because if you've got 4 or 5 people on a call, 2 people talk about the weather, the other 3 people check out. So like, we can see that engagement actually directly apply. We were able to do better action items because someone says, hey, I got that. And you're like, no one said their name, but they nodded their head and said, I got that. And we have the context of what was talked about before and that person nodding their head. So we're picking that up and we're creating better action items. Questions where, hey, how's your weather? How's it going? How are the kids doing? All that stuff. That's filler at the end of the day. Those aren't important. So if you actually look at some of these large language models, hey, what were the key questions in the meeting? Sometimes you get 33 questions. You're like, this is no value at all. But if I can go in and say where people are nodding their head, where people are trying to interrupt each other to answer the question, this is a high engagement question. I'm going to move this up to the list. So that's where we started to see really significant uptick. And what was happening was the legacy players that were doing transcription, they had already educated this large group like, hey, transcripts are important. We came along and said, like, hey, we have summaries, but these aren't just OpenAI type summaries. These are summaries that incorporate reaction. And they started to say, okay, this is awesome. This is great. Then as we started to get this momentum, we had this flywheel, probably a lot like early Snapchat, where if you use it, you will invite other people to use it if it's valuable. And you start to build this kind of circle that expands and gets bigger and bigger. Well, that circle got to the point where now 40% of our traffic, 30 to 40%, depending on the month, is international. We introduced Spanish language earlier this year. Now it's our number 2 language. We introduced Hindi just 2 weeks ago. Now it's our number 4 language. So what's happening is these markets, people are like, a lot of times we're the first time anyone's ever used AI in a lot of these markets, where they're like, hey, I use meetings, and this AI came into this meeting and I saw it and I got a report about it because they shared it with me. Oh, wow, this is cool. Did you write this? No, I didn't write this. The computer wrote it. And they're like, this is freaking great. So they go and they create an account and they're like, oh, this is awesome. And it's really snowballed where, like, in universities in South America, like, we've got 30,000 students in certain universities that are going in and using it both online, the teachers, the individual students, and they're stacking and they're expanding out in that domain. And so it's really gotten to that point now where people are finding the value of AI, not just at the enterprise level, but it's really, ours is really bottoms up, where they're going in and saying, this is actually making my life better. And in a lot of cases, I'll give you an example, like with Chile. Our license costs $30 a month, 15 to $30 a month to buy. They're buying the license, but if you look at the average income in that market, a lot of the times they're spending 2, 3, 4, 5% of their income to buy our solution to do it for unlimited meetings. But the return is so high that they're willing to make that change. And I think That's where it's like, okay, how are you optimizing? What's the value that you provide? If someone is willing to give up 5% of their income because of your service, that goes and says you've got product market fit.
That's crazy, man. It's so cool. Is what has been like kind of like a thing that you've learned from just like how people like communicate with one another? Like are those like filler questions useful? Like does that set you up for a better meeting? Like any weird things you've learned from this?
Uh, Most important things, a couple things are, one is starting on time is critical. And then going over actually makes the meeting get worse because people are nervous about their next call, their next meeting. So even if they're on the call, they are disengaged. They're typing away. They're saying, hey, I'll be there in 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Those things come up. And so that was just interesting to see like where engagement and sentiment kind of adjust. The other thing that was really powerful is meetings on Zoom, on Google Meet, on Microsoft Teams. It's really Snapchat if you think about it, because when you go to a meeting, we're talking right now. After this meeting is done, it's gone. It's ephemeral today. And so all this time of like three senior folks talking about the industry, in theory, if this was just a regular meeting, not a podcast, it would disappear into the ether. It wouldn't exist anywhere. And it would just be our memory that we would rely on what are next steps, what are action items, et cetera. And if you think about that from an enterprise perspective, like imagine how much data exhaust is just disappearing there. That is incredibly valuable. That people have spent 3 hours, or you've got 20 people on a call an hour. You spent 20 hours on this thing and it's gone. And you might have to do another follow-up meeting because it isn't measured, it isn't recorded. So I think there's this benefit of building this system of record when it comes to meetings because that doesn't exist today. And building that system of record creates this huge knowledge base that doesn't exist. So if you think about the large language models, they're looking at, web pages, they're looking at websites, emails, et cetera. But when you think about this content here in this meeting, it isn't available anywhere. So this becomes like going in and creating a system of record for this ephemeral data.
That's super fascinating because, I think over the last decade or so, there have been solutions that you said like record or provide transcripts or provide just like some knowledge base of these meetings. But I think like you're talking about missing that reactive layer that Reed is providing and the context. Are you seeing like sales teams and folks that have the same type of structured meeting over and over use this as a way to like identify, okay, I'm really losing 80% of my prospects here. Like my delivery is not good and I can see it in the reaction layer and the data. Are you seeing people use it to actually improve delivery and improve their ability to speak and improve those outcomes?
100%. And it's been really cool. We've got this coaching feature that goes in and says, what was your bias and charisma? So we actually go in and when David speaks, how did everybody else react to him non-verbally? When David listens, was he nodding his head when the client's listening? Or was I distracted? I was looking at my phone and being distracted. And those things and the rate of speed in which we talk. Do I use too many filler words? What are the filler words that I use? I think I used like 1,400 times in a month that I looked at recently. So it's like, okay. And the beauty of that is it's not your manager telling you, it's the AI telling you that. So it's not going in and saying, hey, you're a horrible speaker. Here are all the things that you need to fix. Because I think most people would be like, oh, that's kind of offensive. Like you're critiquing me. But when it's the AI, you're kind of like, okay. And then we actually get the video clips where I'm talking too fast or I say a swear word or if I say something where I interrupt, I can play those moments back. And I can be like, yep, that is way too fast. Or I should not have said the F word there. That was inappropriate. I need to work on that. Even though it was a funny joke, I shouldn't have said it. And when you pick those things up, people self-correct and they do it on their own because it's like if you use Runkeeper or one of the running apps, it's like if you use anything like Grammarly, et cetera, like you're self-correcting versus somebody else telling you and you're more likely to take action against it. And this is where I think AI is really valuable. It's not about replacing people. It's going in and saying like, hey, let me tell you what you can do better. And you can take that advice or not, but let me give you information to accurately say, do I want to change the outcome of this meeting? Because I say too many filler words. And when I listen back to it, it doesn't sound great. I should really work on that. And so that's been a big push. On the sales side of things, there are legacy players that do sales enablement. They record the calls, they create the summaries, and they kind of create this basic kind of action item list. What we're finding is a large set of those customers are coming towards us. about when they're about to get the renewal coming in, because that's legacy technology. And legacy technology is built on more expensive tools. They have certain price points that are locked in. It's like old school TV. You buy a TV spot, it costs you $200,000-$300,000 versus you can spend $20,000 on digital advertising, get more reach, better performance. It's the same thing when it comes to Reed. They're coming to us and saying like, hey, you do all of this and more, and you do it for 90% lower costs. Yeah, I can totally do this and I can expense this. And what's happening is a little bit of snowball where they have this license, then if 10, 20, 40 people in the organization start to use it, and they're like, okay, we need to decide between A versus B what we're going to move forward with. And they'll start to dive in. And that's actually really helped us where a good chunk of our growth has been product-led growth. It hasn't been a sales function. It's been people seeing it, trying it out, and experience the return. And I think it's the same way like programmatic or paid search. You hear someone else say like, oh, this is incredibly valuable. It's easy to just set up. Like ours is like, you go to our website, use Google single sign-on, and you're on, and you change your settings. I think it's the same thing when you think about Google. It's like buy a bunch of keywords, see if it works, and you see the ROI on the back end. Buy some programmatic inventory. Hey, what's your CPM? What's your ROI? Does it back out? And this is, I think, more AI is really more mainstream optimization of that inventory. And that inventory is the knowledge, the data that you hold, and how can a third party optimize against that?
And you talk about, I mean, A, I guess like just how sticky it is, B, how viral it is, and then I think as you were saying it, I was just thinking it's like it's such a better way of doing meetings, but it's confined obviously to like kind of the digital world. Do you see a scenario where like you guys are in hardware and we like if we're at a meeting, the three of us, and we can like throw down something and turn on Read, and like is that where the future looks like?
100%. So we've got a couple of things that we do now based on usage patterns that we've seen across our users. So one is we let you upload videos or upload audio, and then we'll create a summary against that. We can identify unique speakers, and we can use the same models that we do, even if there's no video associated with it. Because are you interrupting someone? Are you talking really fast? What's the gap when someone asks a question? Someone says, can you repeat that question? That is, for anyone who's on a call, listens to this podcast, if someone says, can you repeat that question? There's not a sound issue. There's not anything. They weren't paying attention, and you need to adjust your approach. But from a future perspective, today we've actually, about 3 months ago, we introduced the ability to pull down emails. So now we're actually doing email summaries. So we're looking across your inbox and we're summarizing all the emails in the inbox to say, hey, these are the most important things that are coming up. So if you get 100 emails a day, we can identify what is most important. We can give you summary, action items, key questions that are in there. With Slack and Teams, we also have an integration on your messages. And if you think about Slack and Teams, it's a blessing and a curse in terms of you get instant reactions and instant feedback, but the minute you go on to the next thing, you forget that this was 14 pages up where someone asked you to do something. And so we're combining our technology there to go and provide summaries, action items, so things don't get lost. And then in the next quarter, what you're going to see from us is combining all three of those things. So now imagine we're having a conversation. Let's say for this podcast, we had an email about, hey, scheduling a time for the podcast. Then we had the podcast. Then there's follow-up once the podcast goes live. I definitely want to share it across my network. All of those things are kind of action items, and the ability to kind of combine the emails, the messages, the meeting that actually occurs. Now Reed can actually go in and say, hey, the next step is like check into when they're going to publish it. And when they publish it, you want to share this across your social networks. And you can actually say, hey, I can ping Daniel and say like, hey, Daniel, what's the date to publish it? Because I've got a note as an action item. And then I can go in and say, oh, that's great. We're going to publish it on this date. And then I can see, oh, did they publish it or not? They published it. Okay, what did I have to do after they publish it? Oh, I need to post this on LinkedIn and Twitter. So those things, I think, start to become the seamless activity. And our broader vision is imagine HubSpot or Salesforce, where HubSpot and Salesforce, I remember when I was at Foursquare and a couple of other organizations, I had to threaten, you're not going to get paid your commission unless you update Salesforce and the opportunities. Like you had to do that. And everyone knew you had to do it, but nobody wanted to do it. And they made it easier where you can like forward emails to it, you can forward messages to it. Still, people don't do it. Well, now if you're a salesperson using the sales example, hey, internally you have Slack messages to talk about what are our top 10 prospects that we want to go after. Then you send out emails to those prospects. Some of those prospects respond back, and then you set up a meeting. From that meeting, you have follow-ups where you send like a one-pager, and you get all this information. Now you've got this holistic view. You're not just going in and siloed into one platform. You're looking at your holistic interaction for that client. And then you've got the Salesforce opportunity that goes from 25 to 50%, 50 to 75%. Well, you can train those models to go in and say, what were the things that happened in that thread that moved it from 50 to 75%? Oh, in the email that came out, they said, hey, can you send over the IO? We're ready to execute it because we got budget approval. Normally, someone would have to go in and change that opportunity to 90% now. Now imagine the AI is coming in and just say, like, hey, James, do you want to, it opens it up and says, James, do you want to move this opportunity to 90%? Here are the 3 reasons why. You say yes, you swipe right. All of a sudden it opens the window in Salesforce. Everything's pre-filled out and you just hit submit. That's where we're going towards. That's where we're going to be in the next 6 to 12 months. And it's not just for Salesforce. It's for things like patient management. It's for things like healthcare. It's for things like sales, marketing, product, all of those things. It's going to go in and make that process so much simpler.
Yeah, I wish it was like that today, to be honest. That'd be really helpful, David. But I guess, as we look at that, like, there's so much fear, I think, out there. I think it's subsided a little bit, but just that, like, AI is just going to take over jobs and take over things. But I think in how you're describing it, it does become this enablement layer to free up everyone to actually go do the task and not the operational work required. And so as we look ahead on the future of AI, like, does it become autonomous agents that actually do the work for us? Like, what is your vision for the broader ecosystem of AI enablement across consumer and business? And you mentioned a few, but just want to dig in a little bit more.
Yeah, so it becomes like a Snapchat or a TikTok feed where you start to get content that is delivered to you. And it's not based on you searching or chatting for things. If you search or chat for things, that's Ask Jeeves at the end of the day. Yes, in the time and place, Ask Jeeves was an incredible company. People are like, this is the coolest thing. I ask a question, it gives me back an answer. But what you start to realize is asking a question requires you to know what the problem is. It requires you to know everything that is going on. And that isn't possible to do. Like if you've got an organization, your startup, you've got 20 employees, it's hard to know what everything is going on. If you've got 100 employees, it's even harder. 1,000, it's almost ridiculously hard. And so the opportunity is for AI to actually identify based on the things that you interact with, that you are interested in, that you kind of, hey, you get an email and you respond quickly to this email faster than your normal rate of response. If the AI can go and say, hey, you just got a new email from the source, do you want to reply back? You usually respond in the next hour. We think this is going to be important. Those are things where AI will start to be more and more integrated. I don't think it's about autonomous agents that replace full tasks, but it's the agent that goes in and says, hey, I've seen all the data. Here's what I think you should do. So today we're in the land of assistants. So the assistant writes notes, it transcribes, it says these are the action items. In the next 6 months, we're going to the land of senior employee. It's going to go in and pull all those things together and say, hey, you need to do this next. I pulled this meeting from the email with the Zoom plus the Teams, and this is what it looks like. I think the next stage after that is that chief of staff type role where it's like it's going in and actually starting to make recommendations on actions and outcomes. And it's even going as so far as to say like, hey, I created this deck for you. It's 80% done. What do you think? Does this align with what you want to do? And it's asking you even before you realize you have to create a deck. So it's going, it's like, do you want this? Yeah, I want this deck. That sounds good, right? All right. It's like a recommendation at the end of the day. And it's not just for work. I think that's the big thing. Like I'll give you an example where this is where I think working B2C is really kind of exciting and different because I've been B2B pretty much my whole life. During COVID, we had someone reach out to us and said like, hey, I want to jump on a call. I'm also going to have my caregiver jump on the call. And we're like, okay, this is kind of weird, but okay. Because normally we're like, we had to still have this business use case and this business mindset. And the person jumped on the call. The caregiver was on the call and we're like, hey, how's it going? He's like, I love Reed. I found you because somebody else was using it in a meeting. And he was an older gentleman. He was like, yeah, I love it. And the reason why I love it, and I want you to know, is because I have early on stage dementia. And so this was during COVID. He would meet with his family once a week. And so he would meet with his family on Zoom or on Teams or on Google Meet. And he would go in and say like, hey, how's the kids doing? Hey, how's George? How's the basketball game? And they would give him feedback. And he wouldn't remember that until when the next kind of call came up. And so what he started to do was he started to actually read the notes and he would actually reference those data points and he'd be like, hey, how's that basketball game? Did he do well? And he knew for himself, like he knew like he had dementia, so he understood it. But he also knew he wanted people to feel better about his illness. And so he actually used that. And I was just like, damn, that was not even a use case out of the top 100 that I had. And the reason why I brought a caregiver was like, hey, as it progresses, I need to make sure this bill is paid. So I will get an email before the meeting that I can just see the notes and I can have that conversation. So can you make sure that goes on? And I think that's where it's like, we talk about all these AI use cases for enterprise, but I think it's going to be the consumer side that actually pushes a lot of the use cases that we're seeing.
Yeah, that's incredible. And like, yeah, that's amazing. I think as you say it, like the fact that someone even now can start to be like self-aware that like Reed can solve that problem also feels like such a pretty big mind shift moment, right? So that's very, very cool. Have you found, like, does Reed have like a personality? Like, has this AI, like, do you like, like, I don't know, is it to you? Are you starting to humanize it a bit, or do you still look at it as like it's a computer?
It's a computer. Like we don't want to humanize it. It's like it's giving you a summary. It's giving you things to do. Like you don't think of TikTok feed as someone actually curating it. It's the feed at the end of the day. And I think for us, we want it to be, here's the content, here are the entities that we think are interesting to you, and here are the recommendations that we recommend you take.
That's awesome. And so for people wanting to learn more about Reed and maybe try it out and see this for themselves, where can they learn more about Reed? Where can they go download it? How can they go use this thing across their video conferencing?
Yeah, super easy. Go to read.ai. Top right, create an account, use single sign-on on Zoom, Teams, whatever your solution is. You click that button, you get a 7-day free trial, no credit card required. And then even after the 7-day free trial, which is our enterprise plan, we'll put you on a free plan if you decide not to sign up. So you still get 10 or 5 free meetings a month. And that works for a big contingent of our population of users. Hopefully the power users taking inventory will go in and say, hey, I need them for more than 5 meetings. But it really is really straightforward to do. And it's if you've been experimenting or thinking about how to apply AI to your workflow, this is one of the simplest ways to do it. Like this is going to immediately help you out and give you the ability to scale very quickly when it comes to just the meeting notes, the follow-ups, because we're all in meetings every single day, multiple times a day, where they start to blur together and you're like, what do I need to do today? Because I just got out of 6 hours of meetings. Reed can tell you what you need.
Yeah, I think everyone listening to this is in those 6 hours of meetings a day. So I think everyone should go download Reed, go pay for it. It's not much, and make it part of your workflow. But David, this was great. Congrats on all the continued success. Thank you for coming on the podcast and talking us through the entire journey.
Excellent. Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.